The massive briefing room buzzed with strange sounds and smells. Commander Zexther adjusted his position on the metal platform designed for his reptilian body. His yellow eyes swept across the room, taking in the various alien species that made up the Galactic Defense Coalition. The air recyclers worked overtime to keep the atmosphere breathable for everyone. To his left sut hive speaker clicked her insect-like head clicking softly as she processed information through her compound. Eyes, the Zilani were always thinking, always calculating. Zexther respected that about them. Across the room, War Prime Gorthal-S crystalline body caught the light, sending rainbow patterns across the walls. The Kethara communicated through color changes in their crystal structure, and right now Gorthal showed calm blue patterns, but it was the humans that drew most attention. They were the newest members of the coalition, and their small delegation sat together near the front of the room. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, a young human with short brown hair, kept checking his datapad nervously. Next to him, Captain Lisa Grant sat perfectly still, her green eyes scanning the room with the look of someone who had seen combat. The briefing began with standard protocol. Each species would present their military capabilities and share intelligence about their enemy. The Devourers. The Devourers were a nightmare that consumed entire worlds, leaving nothing but empty rock behind. They had already destroyed 12 inhabited planets in the Outer Rim. The Vorthek presented first. Zexther listened as his people's representative explained their advanced plasma weaponry and shield technology. The Vorthak had been fighting wars for over 3,000 years. They knew how to win battles efficiently and with minimal losses. The Zilani went next. Clictor's voice buzzed as she described their hive mind tactical advantages and their ability to coordinate thousands of units simultaneously. The Zilani never panicked because panic was illogical. They made decisions based on mathematics and probability. The Kethara shared their energy-based weapons and their ability to survive in environments that would kill other species. War Prime Gorthal-S colors shifted to confident purple as he spoke about their defensive capabilities. Then it was humanity's turn. Lieutenant Morrison stood up, clearly nervous about speaking to so many alien commanders. He activated a holographic display showing Earth and its various conflicts throughout history. Humans have been fighting wars for our entire recorded history, Morrison began. We've developed many different approaches to combat based on our experiences. The display showed images of human soldiers from different time periods. Ancient warriors with swords and shields, soldiers with primitive firearms, and modern troops with advanced equipment. Our military doctrine focuses on adaptability, Morrison continued. We believe in using whatever works regardless of whether it follows traditional rules of warfare. Zexther as translator worked to make sense of some of the human terms. What did they mean by fighting dirty and guerrilla warfare? The concepts seemed inefficient compared to direct military engagement. Morrison clicked to the next slide, showing historical battles. One of our most famous military engagements was the Battle of Thermopylae. 300 Spartan warriors held off an army of thousands for 3 days. They knew they would die, but they fought anyway to buy time. For their people? Several aliens in the room made sounds that their translators interpreted as amusement. The idea of deliberately choosing a battle you knew you would lose seemed foolish to most galactic species. Another example is the Battle of the Alamo, Morrison said, showing another image. A small group of defenders held a fort against overwhelming odds. They could have surrendered, but they chose to fight to the death instead. Clictor's compound eyes glittered. Through the translator, her voice carried a tone of polite confusion. Lieutenant Morrison, these examples seem to show humans making poor tactical decisions. Why would you choose death over strategic retreat? Morrison looked uncomfortable. He glanced at Captain Grant, who nodded for him to continue. Well, it's about more than tactics, Morrison said. It's about principles. Sometimes there are things more important than surviving. This statement caused a ripple of confusion throughout the room. Most species understood survival as the primary directive. Everything else came second to staying alive. Morrison continued his presentation, showing more examples of human conflicts. He talked about something called the never surrender mentality and described how human soldiers were trained to keep fighting even when badly wounded or outnumbered. We also use psychological warfare extensively, Morrison explained. We try to break enemy morale by making them afraid to fight us. How do you make enemies afraid? Asked War Prime Gorthel, his crystals shifting to curious yellow. We have a reputation for being unpredictable, Morrison said. Human soldiers are known for doing unexpected things in combat. We use unconventional weapons, employ unusual tactics, and we never give up, even in impossible situations. Zexler found himself growing more confused as the presentation continued. The human approach to warfare seemed chaotic and wasteful. Why would anyone choose death over a tactical withdrawal? Why would you use unconventional weapons when conventional ones worked perfectly well? Captain Grant finally stood up. Unlike Morrison, she showed no signs of nervousness. Her voice was calm and steady as she addressed the room. I understand our methods might seem strange to our allies, she said. Human warfare developed differently than most species because we spent thousands of years fighting each other. She activated a new display showing Earth's continents. Humans evolved on a world where every piece of land was contested. We had hundreds of different nations, tribes, and cultures, all competing for resources. We learned to fight not just to win territory, but to survive as a people. The display showed various human conflicts throughout history. Wars that lasted decades, battles fought in impossible terrain, conflicts where small groups held out against massive armies. We developed what we call warrior cultures, Grant continued. Societies that viewed dying in battle as honorable and surrendering as shameful. These cultures produced soldiers who would rather die than admit defeat. Zexler made a note in his personal log. This explained some of the strange human examples, but it still seemed inefficient. Why create soldiers who were more likely to die unnecessarily? Our training methods reflect this history, Grant said. Human soldiers are taught that some missions are worth dying for. We prepare them psychologically to sacrifice themselves if necessary to complete their objectives. The room fell quiet as the aliens processed this information. Most species train their soldiers to survive and complete missions. The idea of deliberately training them to die seemed wasteful and primitive. Morrison took over again, showing technical specifications for human weapons and ships. The technology was impressive, but not extraordinary compared to what other coalition members possessed. What stood out was how humans intended to use their equipment. Human battle doctrine emphasizes close-range combat and what we call decisive engagement, Morrison explained. We prefer to get close to enemies and finish fights quickly, even if it means taking heavier casualties. This seems inefficient, Clichter observed. Why accept higher casualty rates when long-range engagement would preserve more troops? Morrison looked at Captain Grant again. She nodded slightly. Because humans believe that some enemies need to be completely destroyed, Morrison said. We don't fight just to win territory or achieve political goals. Sometimes we fight to make sure certain threats never come back. The briefing continued for another hour, with humans explaining their various military traditions and capabilities. They talked about special forces units trained for impossible missions, soldiers who specialized in fighting behind enemy lines, and something they called total war, where entire populations became part of the military effort. As the meeting ended, Zexler found himself troubled by what he had learned. The humans seemed competent enough, but their approach to warfare was unlike anything in galactic military theory. They appeared to value dramatic gestures over efficient tactics and seemed almost eager to die in combat. Later that evening, Zexler recorded his thoughts in his personal log. The humans present interesting capabilities, but their military philosophy seems based on primitive emotional responses rather than logical strategy. Their historical examples appear to be exaggerated myths designed to make their species seem more formidable than they actually are. I recommend we assign them support roles in the coming conflict with the Devourers rather than frontline combat positions. He had no idea how wrong he was about to be. The mining world of Kepler 442b looked peaceful from orbit. Red dust covered most of the surface. broken by deep canyons where the miners had dug for rare metals. But peace was an illusion. The Devourers had landed 3 days ago, and their black ships now covered the northern continent like a disease. Commander Zexler stood in the command center of the Coalition flagship, watching tactical displays that showed the enemy positions. The numbers were not good. Intelligence reported over 50,000 Devourer ground troops, with more ships arriving every hour. The Coalition had brought 12,000 soldiers from various species. Standard doctrine suggests we evacuate civilian populations and establish a defensive perimeter. Hive speaker Clichter announced, her compound eyes reflecting the red glow of the tactical displays. We cannot win a direct engagement with these numbers. War Prime Gorthal-S crystalline body shifted to worried orange colors. The Cathara agree. We should preserve our forces for a more favorable engagement. Zexler nodded. This was logical military thinking. When faced with overwhelming odds, you saved your troops to fight another day. It was basic strategy that every military academy in the galaxy taught. But Captain Lisa Grant, who had been quietly observing the tactical discussion, stepped forward. The human contingent will be deploying to the surface, she said calmly, Zexler's yellow eyes focused on her. Captain, did you not hear the casualty projections? This is a losing battle. We heard them, Grant replied. We're going anyway. The statement made no sense to anyone in the room. Why would the humans deliberately choose to fight a battle they could not win? Lieutenant Jake Morrison activated his communication device. All human units, prepare for immediate deployment. Marines to the dropships. This is not a drill. Through the ship's viewing ports, they could see human vessels moving into attack formation. Unlike the other Coalition ships which were taking defensive positions, the human fleet was heading directly toward the planet. On the surface of Kepler 442b, Sergeant Danny Rodriguez checked his weapon one final time. His squad of 12 Marines huddled in their drop ship as it descended through the atmosphere. The ship shook as Devourer anti-aircraft fire exploded around them. Listen up, Rodriguez shouted over the noise. We've got miners trapped in Facility 7. Coalition Command says it's too dangerous to extract them, so we're going to do it anyway. Private Amy Watson, the squad's medic, looked nervous but determined. How many Devourers between us and the facility, Sarge? About 3,000, Rodriguez replied with a grin that would have terrified most alien species. Should be fun. The other Marines laughed. To an outside observer, their reaction would seem insane. They were joking about fighting impossible odds. The dropship hit the ground hard, and the Marines poured out into a landscape that looked like hell. Black smoke rose from burning buildings. The air smelled of sulfur and death. In the distance, they could see Devourer forces moving like a dark tide across the red landscape, back in orbit. The alien commanders watched in confusion as human forces deployed across the planet's surface. Instead of establishing safe defensive positions, the humans were spreading out and moving directly toward enemy concentrations. What are they doing? Clichter asked, her translator struggling to convey her bewilderment. Captain Grant studied the tactical display. They're doing what humans do. They're going to make the Devourers pay for every inch of ground. The first engagement happened near the Eastern Mining Complex. A company of human soldiers encountered a Devourer force 3 times their size. Standard military doctrine called for immediate withdrawal and request for reinforcement. The humans attacked. War Prime Gorthal watched the battle through orbital sensors, his crystal body cycling through confused color patterns. The humans were using tactics that made no logical sense. Instead of maintaining formation and using their superior technology, they were breaking into small groups and fighting at close range. They're going to get themselves killed, he observed. Yes, Captain, Grant agreed. And they're going to take a lot of Devourers with them. The battle raged for 6 hours. Human soldiers used every dirty trick they could think of. They set traps in abandoned buildings. They used improvised explosives made from mining equipment. They fought hand-to-hand when their weapons ran out of ammunition. Sergeant Rodriguez's squad had reached Facility 7, but they were completely surrounded. The miners they had come to save were huddled in a reinforced bunker deep underground. To reach them, the Marines would have to fight through hundreds of devourers. "Sarge, we could call for extraction," Private Watson suggested as enemy fire sparked off the rocks around them. "Live to fight another day." Rodriguez looked at her like she had said something in an alien language. "Watson, there are 47 civilians down there, families with kids. We're not leaving without them. But we'll probably die trying to get them out. Then we die trying," Rodriguez said simply. "That's what Marines do." The squad began their assault on the facility. They moved through underground tunnels, using knowledge of the mining complex that the Devourers lacked. When they encountered enemy forces, they fought with a ferocity that surprised even the battle-hardened alien observers. Private Watson later described the fighting in her report. The humans didn't just try to kill their enemies, they tried to terrify them. They used psychological warfare, making noise and creating confusion. They fought like they enjoyed it, which disturbed the Devourers, who were used to facing opponents who showed proper fear, but the numbers were against them. For every Devourer they killed, 2 more appeared. The squad's ammunition ran low, their equipment was damaged. Several Marines were wounded. They kept fighting in orbit. Commander Zexter watched the tactical display with growing horror. The human forces were being systematically destroyed, but they refused to retreat. Unit after unit was reporting casualties, but none were requesting extraction. "Why won't they withdraw?" he asked Captain Grant. "Because they haven't completed their mission yet," she replied. "Their mission is suicide." Grant looked at him with those calm green eyes. "Their mission is to save civilians and hurt the enemy. Dying is just an acceptable cost." This concept was completely foreign to Zexter's way of thinking. In Vorthek, military culture, soldiers were valuable resources to be preserved. You didn't waste them on impossible missions, but the humans weren't being wasted. Even as they died, they were inflicting tremendous casualties on the Devourers. Every human squad that was overrun took dozens of enemies with them. The mining facility battles were costing the Devourers far more than they had expected. Sergeant Rodriguez's squad had rescued the miners, but they were trapped in the facility with no way out. Devourer forces had surrounded the building completely. The Marines had used most of their ammunition and explosives. Rodriguez made a decision that would haunt the alien observers for years to come. "Watson, get those civilians to the deepest part of the bunker," he ordered. "Everyone else, rig whatever explosives we have left." "What are you planning, Sarge?" one of the Marines asked. "We're going to bring this whole facility down on top of the Devourers. The civilians will be safe in the bunker, but we won't be." The Marines looked at each other. No one argued. No one suggested alternatives. They simply began placing explosive charges throughout the building's support structure. Private Watson transmitted a final message to the Coalition fleet. Facility 7 civilians secured in deep bunker. Marine squad preparing final defensive action. Tell our families we did our job. The explosion could be seen from orbit. The entire mining facility collapsed, crushing hundreds of Devourers who had been attempting to break into the bunker. The civilians survived, protected by layers of reinforced rock. The Marines did not. Similar scenes played out across the planet. Human forces fought until they were completely destroyed, but they accomplished their objectives. They saved civilians. They destroyed enemy equipment. They made the Devourers afraid to advance too quickly. By the end of the day, the human contingent had been almost completely wiped out. Out of 3,000 soldiers who had deployed to the surface, fewer than 200 survived. But they had saved over 8,000 civilian lives and killed nearly 10,000. DVOURS. The alien commanders gathered in the briefing room to discuss what they had witnessed. The atmosphere was somber and confused. "I have never seen anything like this," War Prime Gorthel admitted, his crystal body showing deep purple patterns of distress. "They fought like they wanted to die." Hive speaker Clickter's compound eyes reflected the tactical displays that still showed the aftermath of the battle. "It makes no mathematical sense." They could have achieved better casualty ratios with defensive tactics. Commander Zexter was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. I don't think they were trying to achieve good casualty ratios, he said. Slowly, I think they were trying to do something else entirely. Captain Grant, one of the few human officers still alive, entered the briefing room. Her uniform was torn and dirty from her own deployment to the surface. She had personally led a rescue mission to save a group of trapped engineers. Captain, Zexter said carefully, I need to understand something. Why did your soldiers choose to die instead of retreating? Grant sat down heavily, exhaustion clear on her face. The medical bay of the Coalition flagship was quieter than usual. Most of the beds held human survivors from the battle on Kepler 442b. Some had lost limbs. Others bore scars that would never fully heal. But what disturbed the alien medical staff most was how calm the wounded humans seemed. Private Amy Watson sat on the edge of her bed, her left arm in a medical brace. She was writing letters to the families of her dead squad mates. When the Zilani medic asked why she wasn't resting, Watson simply said, "Someone needs to tell them how their boys died. They need to know it mattered." 3 days after the battle, the Coalition leadership called an emergency meeting. The briefing room felt different now. The easy confidence that had marked earlier gatherings was gone, replaced by nervous tension and unspoken questions. Commander Zexter entered the room first, his yellow eyes scanning the assembled officers. The reptilian commander had spent the last 3 days reviewing battle footage and reading reports that made no sense according to traditional military theory. War Prime. Gorthal-S crystalline bodies showed deep purple patterns of confusion. The Cathara had fought wars for thousands of years, but they had never seen anything like what the humans had done on Kepler-442b. Hivespeaker. Clicker clicked nervously as she processed data streams from multiple sources. Her compound eyes reflected the blue glow of her portable computer as she tried to understand the mathematical impossibility of human behavior. Eldermind Sithal floated into the room, his ancient consciousness housed in a flowing ethereal form. The collective being had existed for over 10,000 years and had witnessed the rise and fall of dozens of galactic civilizations. Even he seemed disturbed by recent events. Captain Lisa Grant entered last, walking slowly due to injuries sustained during her own rescue mission. Her green eyes showed the exhaustion of someone who had lost most of her people, but her voice remained steady and professional. "We need answers," Commander Zexter began without ceremony. "What we witnessed on Kepler 442b defies every principle of military science. Your soldiers fought like they had lost their minds. They fought like humans," Grant replied simply. "That's, Not an explanation," Clicker interjected, her translator buzzing with frustration. "According to our analysis, your forces could have achieved identical objectives with 60% fewer casualties using standard tactical doctrine." Grant activated a holographic display showing the battle zones. "You're thinking about it wrong? You're still trying to apply your logic to our actions?" War Prime Gorthal-S colors shifted to agitated yellow. "There's only one logic in warfare. You achieve objectives with minimal losses. Your people did the opposite." "No," Grant said firmly. "Our people achieved objectives regardless of losses." "There's a difference." Eldermind Sithal's voice resonated through the room like distant thunder. "In my 10 millennia of existence, I have studied the military practices of 417 different species. None have ever prioritized mission completion over force preservation to this degree." Grant looked at the ancient being with respect. "That's because you've never encountered humans before." She changed the display to show historical data from Earth. "You remember the stories Lieutenant Morrison told you during our first briefing, the ones you found amusing?" Images appeared of ancient battlefields, warriors with primitive weapons, soldiers in various uniforms throughout human history. "The Battle of Thermopylae wasn't a myth," Grant continued. 300 Spartan warriors really did hold off an army of thousands. They knew they would die, but they fought anyway because their sacrifice would inspire others and buy time for their people. Commander Zexter shifted uncomfortably. But that was ancient history. Primitive warfare. The Battle of the Alamo happened in 1836, Grant said, showing new images. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was in 1943. The Battle of Cameron was fought by French Foreign Legion soldiers in 1863. These aren't ancient myths. They're part of human military tradition. The display showed battle after battle, spanning thousands of years of human history. In every case, small groups of soldiers had chosen death over surrender when facing impossible odds. Dr. Helen Parker, a human military psychologist, entered the briefing room. She had been brought specifically to help explain human behavior to their confused allies. The psychological profile of human warriors is unique in known galactic civilization, Dr. Parker began activating her own displays. Humans evolved as persistence hunters and tribal fighters. Our brain chemistry actually rewards fighting against impossible odds. She showed brain scans comparing human soldiers with warriors from other species. When humans face overwhelming danger, their bodies produce chemicals that enhance physical performance and suppress fear. Other species produce chemicals that encourage tactical withdrawal. Hive speaker Clichter studied the data with growing alarm. You're saying humans are biologically programmed to fight suicidal battles? Not suicidal, Dr. Parker corrected. Sacrificial? There's a difference. Suicide serves no purpose. Sacrifice serves a greater good. Elder Mind Sithao floated closer to the displays. Explain this concept of greater good in military terms. Captain Grant took over again. Humans form bonds with their comrades that transcend individual survival instincts. A human soldier will die to save his squad mates without hesitation. A squad will die to save their company. A company will die to protect civilians they've never met. This is inefficient, Warprime Gorthel observed, his crystals showing frustrated orange patterns. It's not about efficiency, Grant replied. It's about identity. Humans don't just fight to win battles. We fight to prove who we are. Dr. Parker activated a new display showing human military traditions from around Earth. Every human culture has developed warrior codes that emphasize honor over survival. The Japanese samurai, the European knights, the American Marines, the Russian Spetsnaz, all operate on the same basic principle, which is, Commander Zexther asked, death before dishonor. Some things are worse than dying. This statement created an uncomfortable silence in the room. Most galactic species viewed death as the ultimate failure, the one thing to be avoided at all costs. Hive speaker Clichter processed this information through her analytical systems. I have reviewed human military history. The pattern is consistent across all time periods and cultures. Humans routinely choose death over surrender, even when surrender would be tactically advantageous. Because surrender isn't always tactically advantageous in the long term, Grant explained. When humans surrender, we're not just giving up territory or resources. We're giving up our identity as a people worth respecting. Elder Mind Sithal's ancient consciousness struggled with this concept. In my experience, most species view survival as the highest priority. They surrender when defeat is certain because preserving their people for future opportunities is logical. Humans don't think that way, Dr. Parker said. We believe that how you die is more important than whether you die. A human who dies fighting impossible odds becomes an inspiration to others. A human who surrenders without fighting becomes a cautionary tale. Captain Grant brought up footage from the recent battle on Kepler 442b. The images showed Sergeant Rodriguez's final moments as he detonated explosives that brought down the mining facility on top of enemy forces. Rodriguez knew he was going to die, Grant explained. But he also knew that his death would save 47 civilians and kill hundreds of enemies. In human thinking, that's not a tragedy, that's a victory. Commander Zexther watched the footage with growing unease. But what about his family, his friends? Didn't they matter? Of course they mattered, Grant replied. But Rodriguez knew they would be proud of how he died. In human culture, dying bravely brings honor to your entire family line. War Prime. Gorthel's colors shifted through a spectrum of confused patterns. This explains your battlefield behavior, but it creates new problems. If humans are willing to die for any cause, how do we know when you'll turn that attitude against us? The question hung in the air like a toxic gas. The alien leaders suddenly realized they had allied themselves with a species that viewed death as preferable to defeat. Captain Grant looked around the room, seeing the fear in their alien eyes. You want to know the truth? Every human military academy studies the weaknesses of every known alien species, including all of you. The statement sent shock waves through the room. Elder Mind Sifal's form flickered with surprise. We know how to kill Vorthek by targeting the nerve clusters behind your eyes, Grant continued calmly. We know Zelani hive minds collapse if you disrupt their communication frequencies. We know Cathara crystals shatter at specific sonic wavelengths. Commander. Zexter's yellow eyes widened. You've been planning to fight us? We've been planning to fight everyone, Grant replied. It's what humans do. We prepare for every possible conflict because we've learned that peace is temporary but knowledge is permanent. Dr. Parker pulled up classified military documents that had been declassified for this meeting. Earth maintains detailed battle plans for fighting every known alien species. Not because we want to fight you, but because we want to be ready if we have to. Hive speaker clicked her compound eyes, reflected the data streaming across her displays. The Coalition war room buzzed with tense conversations. 2 weeks had passed since the revelations about human military philosophy, and the alien leadership was deeply divided. The upcoming assault on the Devourer home system required unity, but fear of their human allies was creating cracks in the coalition. Prime Voice Kethanai stood at the center of the room, her diplomatic species' natural ability to sense emotions making her visibly uncomfortable. The fear, suspicion, and anger radiating from the assembled alien leaders was overwhelming her sensitive nervous system. We cannot proceed with humans in combat roles, she announced, her translator conveying the strain in her voice. The risk is too great. Commander Zexter's yellow eyes reflected the tactical displays showing the Devourer home system. 3 planets, heavily fortified, defended by millions of enemy soldiers. It would be the largest military operation in galactic history. The humans have proven effective against the Devourers, he said reluctantly. Their unconventional tactics have achieved results. War Prime Gorthal's crystalline body pulsed with agitated red patterns. They've also proven they're willing to sacrifice anything to achieve their goals. What happens when their goals change? Hive speaker Clickter's compound eyes glittered as she processed multiple data streams. Statistical analysis shows human combat effectiveness is directly proportional to their willingness to accept casualties. This makes them unpredictable in coalition operations. Elder Mind Sithao floated near the viewing ports, his ancient consciousness troubled by memories of species that had grown too dangerous for their own good. In my experience, warriors who view death as victory eventually find reasons to die that serve no logical purpose. The argument continued for hours. Some alien leaders wanted to restrict human participation to support roles. Others suggested keeping human forces in reserve. A few radical voices even proposed excluding humans from the final assault entirely. Captain Lisa Grant sat quietly in the corner listening to the debate about her people's fate. Her injuries from Kepler 442b had healed, but the emotional weight of losing most of her command still showed in her tired eyes. Finally, the doors to the war room opened, and a figure that made every human in the room stand at attention entered. General Frank Stone was not an imposing man by human standards. Average height, gray hair, weathered face marked by old scars. But something about him commanded respect from every human who saw him. His uniform bore ribbons and medals that most coalition members didn't recognize, but the humans clearly did. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, who had survived the battle on Kepler 442b, whispered to a nearby Zelani officer, "That's the General Stone, hero of Titan Colony, Mars, and Europa." The alien looked confused. "I don't recognize those battle honors." Morrison's face went pale. "You wouldn't. Those were human civil wars." General Stone walked slowly to the center of the room, his presence somehow making the space feel smaller. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried clearly to every corner. I understand there's some concern about human participation in the final assault, he said simply. Prime Voice Kethanai composed herself, her diplomatic training overriding her emotional sensitivity. General, we respect human combat effectiveness, but your species' approach to warfare creates complications in coalition operations. Stone nodded thoughtfully. I see, you're afraid of us. The blunt statement created an uncomfortable silence. No one wanted to admit it, but the general had spoken the truth that everyone was thinking. We're concerned about predictability, Commander Zexter said carefully. Human tactics are difficult to coordinate with standard military doctrine. Because we fight differently, Stone acknowledged. You want to understand why. War Prime Gorthal S. crystals shifted to curious yellow. Your people have shared historical examples and psychological analysis, but we still don't understand the fundamental logic behind your military philosophy? General Stone looked around the room, studying each alien face. How long have your species been spacefaring? The Vorthek have been traveling between stars for 3,000 years, Zexter replied. The Cathara for 5,000, Gorthal added. 12,000 for my people, Elder Mind Sifal intoned. Stone nodded. And in all that time, how many wars have you fought against other members of your own species? The question seemed strange to the aliens. Clickter's translator buzzed with confusion. Internal conflicts are wasteful. Most spacefaring species resolve disputes through negotiation or economic pressure. Humans reached space 50 years ago, Stone said quietly. In that same 50-year period, we fought 7 major wars against each other. In the century before that, we fought 2 global conflicts that killed over 100 million people. The numbers hit the alien listeners like physical blows. The scale of human self-destruction was beyond their comprehension. But those conflicts you mentioned earlier, Elder Mind Sithal said slowly, Titan Colony, Mars, Europa, those were after humans reached space. General Stone's weathered face showed no emotion. The Titan Colony rebellion lasted 3 years. The Mars insurgency went on for 5. The Europa incident was ... brief but intense. Captain Grant and the other humans in the room had gone very still. These were chapters of human history that weren't widely discussed, even among their own people. I commanded forces in all 3 conflicts, Stone continued. I've fought humans who knew exactly how dangerous other humans could be. I've seen what happens when our species turns its full attention to destroying itself. Prime Voice Kefanias. Empathic abilities were picking up waves of old pain and regret from the general. What did you learn from these experiences? Stone walked to the tactical display showing the Devourer home system. I learned that humans don't just study war as a science or an art, we live it as a religion. He activated historical files that most of the Coalition had never seen. Images of human conflicts throughout their short space age appeared on the screens. The Titan Colony rebellion started over mining rights, Stone explained. By the end, both sides were using nuclear weapons on civilian populations because surrender had become unthinkable. War Prime Gorthal S. crystals showed deep purple distress patterns. You destroyed your own people over resources? We destroyed our own people over the principle that some things are worth any price, Stone corrected. The Mars insurgency began as a political dispute about colonial independence. It ended with entire cities being depressurized because neither side would accept defeat. The images on the screen showed devastation that shocked the alien observers. Ruined settlements, dead planets, populations that had fought until only ruins remained. The Europa incident, Stone said quietly, lasted only 6 months. But in that time, humans developed 17 new ways to kill each other in zero-gravity environments. We weaponized ice mining equipment, turned life support systems into poison gas dispensers, and learned how to make nuclear weapons out of reactor cores. Hive speaker Clickter's analytical mind struggled to process the information. These conflicts served no logical purpose. Both sides lost more than they could possibly gain. That's the point you're missing, Stone said, turning to face the assembled alien leaders. Humans don't fight to gain something. We fight to prove something. Commander Zexter leaned forward, his yellow eyes intent. Prove what? That we're willing to pay any price for what we believe in, Stone replied. That we can't be intimidated, bought, or reasoned with when our core values are threatened. General Stone activated another display showing Earth's military academies and training facilities. Every human military officer studies these civil wars in detail. Not because we're proud of them, but because we need to understand what we're capable of. The Titan protocols teach us how to fight an enemy that knows all our tactics. The Mars doctrines show us how to maintain unit cohesion when fighting other humans. The Europa methods demonstrate how to win when both sides are equally desperate. The implications of this education system horrified the alien listeners. Humans were systematically training to fight the most dangerous enemy they could imagine, other humans. When we told you about historical battles during our first briefing, Stone continued, we weren't sharing myths or legends. We were giving you a warning. Prime Voice Kethanai's diplomatic composure finally cracked. A warning about what? Stone's expression remained neutral, but his words carried the weight of absolute certainty. A warning about what happens when humans decide something is worth fighting for. He changed the display one final time, showing classified Earth defense protocols. Every human settlement maintains detailed plans for fighting every other human settlement. Every human military unit trains to fight other human units. Every human soldier learns to kill other humans who are just as well trained, just as equipped, and just as motivated as they are. Elder Mind Sithal's ancient consciousness recoiled from the implications. You prepare to destroy your own species. We prepare to fight the most dangerous enemy in the galaxy, Stone corrected. Ourselves. The war room fell silent as the alien leaders absorbed this revelation. They had been worried about human unpredictability in battle. Now they realized that humans had been restraining themselves during every engagement with alien forces. The Devourer home system looked like a fortress made of 3 worlds. Each planet bristled with weapons platforms, shield generators, and millions of soldiers ready to fight to the death. Intelligence reports estimated the enemy had enough firepower to destroy any attacking fleet 10 times over. Commander Zexter stood on the bridge of the Coalition flagship, watching the massive fleet prepare for the final assault. Ships from dozens of species formed attack formations according to carefully planned tactics. Everything had been calculated, analyzed, and optimized for maximum efficiency, but the human ships hung back, separated from the main fleet like wolves. Waiting at the edge of a campfire's light, the battle began exactly as the war planners had predicted. Coalition forces engaged the outer defenses while specialized units moved to disable key installations. The plan was working, but slowly. Too slowly, enemy reinforcements kept arriving from hidden bases. Devourer ships emerged from asteroid fields and planetary rings surrounding the Coalition fleet. Within hours, what should have been a coordinated assault became a desperate fight for survival. Commander Pete Nash watched the tactical displays from the bridge of the human command ship. The gray-haired captain had served under General Stone during the Europa incident. He understood exactly what kind of war this was becoming. Coalition Command is requesting immediate support, his communications officer reported. Nash looked at the displays showing Coalition ships being systematically destroyed. Good ships, good crews. They were dying because they were fighting by rules that the Devourers didn't follow. Send a message to all Coalition vessels, Nash ordered. Tell them to pull back to minimum safe distance. Sir, that will leave the assault zones undefended. Nash's smile was the same cold expression that General Stone had worn during the war room briefing. No, it won't. The message went out across all Coalition frequencies. To the alien commanders, it seemed like the humans were abandoning the battle just when support was most needed. But the humans who received the transmission understood its real meaning. Colonel Sandra White led the special operations team that had been secretly studying the Devourer home system for weeks. Her team had infiltrated the planets using techniques that no other species would have considered ethical. All units, this is Reaper 6, she transmitted on a frequency that only human forces could access. Coalition rules of engagement are no longer in effect. I repeat, we are weapons-free. The change was immediate and terrifying. Human ships that had been hanging back suddenly accelerated to attack speed. But instead of engaging in traditional ship-to-ship combat, they did something that horrified their alien allies. The first human vessel to reach the enemy lines was a heavy cruiser commanded by Captain Lucy Hayes. Instead of firing weapons, she set her ship on a collision course with a Devourer battleship that was 10 times larger on the Coalition flagship. War Prime Gorthal S. crystals flashed panicked red patterns. The human ship has lost navigation control. They're going to crash. No, Captain Lisa Grant said quietly, watching from the bridge. They're ramming. The human cruiser struck the Devourer battleship at full speed. The explosion could be seen across the entire star system. Both ships were completely destroyed, but the massive enemy vessel had been eliminated by a much smaller human ship. Similar attacks began happening throughout the battle zone. Human ships deliberately crashed into enemy vessels, taking out targets that would have required hours of conventional combat to destroy. But the ramming attacks were just the beginning. Colonel White's infiltration teams had spent weeks placing nuclear charges throughout the Devourer planets. Not in military installations where they would be expected, but in civilian areas, industrial zones, and population centers. Targets are marked, White reported to the human fleet. Beginning urban pacification protocols. The alien coalition members had no idea what urban pacification protocols meant. They were about to learn. Explosions began erupting across all 3 Devourer worlds simultaneously. Not random destruction, but carefully planned chaos that targeted the enemy's ability to maintain organized resistance. Power plants exploded, cutting electricity to entire continents. Water treatment facilities were destroyed, contaminating the water supply. Transportation hubs were demolished, preventing the movement of troops and supplies, but the psychological warfare was even more effective than the physical destruction. Human infiltration teams had studied Devourer society and identified their cultural weaknesses. They broadcast recordings of captured Devourer leaders begging for mercy. They spread rumors about human cannibalism and torture techniques. They made the enemy afraid to sleep, afraid to trust their own commanders, afraid to fight an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. Elder Mind Sithal watched the battle unfold from the safety of the Coalition flagship. His ancient consciousness had witnessed many wars, but nothing like this. They're not trying to defeat the Devourers, he observed with growing horror. They're trying to destroy them completely, Captain Grant nodded grimly. The Devourers consume worlds. They don't negotiate, they don't surrender, and they don't show mercy. So humans decided to show them what total war really looks like. The space battle continued, but the human tactics defied all military logic. Instead of preserving their ships and crews, human commanders used them as weapons. Damaged vessels were converted into guided missiles. Boarding parties didn't try to capture enemy ships. They planted explosives and escaped, turning each boarding action into a suicide bombing. Commander Zexter found himself horrified by the efficiency of human brutality. They're winning, but the cost doesn't matter to them, Grant explained. They're not fighting to win territory or capture resources. They're fighting to make sure the Devourers never threaten anyone again. On the surface of the primary Devourer world, Colonel White's team fought their way through underground tunnels toward the Queen's chamber. The ancient creature that controlled the entire Devourer species had hidden herself in the deepest part of the planet, protected by miles of rock and thousands of guards, but the humans had brought something the Devourers couldn't fight: nuclear weapons designed to burrow through solid rock. White's team didn't try to fight their way to the Queen. They simply placed their charges in strategic locations and triggered controlled explosions that collapsed entire sections of the underground complex. The Devourer Queen, who had lived for over 1,000 years and consumed dozens of civilizations, found herself trapped in her own fortress as human explosives systematically destroyed every escape route. When White's team finally reached the Queen's chamber, the ancient creature was already dying from radiation poisoning. The humans had used dirty bombs that contaminated everything within miles. "Why?" the Queen managed to ask through her translator as Colonel White approached with the final explosive device. "Because someone needs to teach the universe what happens when you threaten innocent people," White replied. Activating the nuclear charge, the explosion destroyed the Queen, her chamber, and White's entire team. But it also sent a seismic shock through the planet that killed millions of Devour eggs in underground nurseries. In space, the human fleet had reduced itself to less than half strength, but they had eliminated nearly the entire Devourer defense force. The surviving human ships regrouped and began the final phase of their assault. Commander Nash transmitted a message to all remaining Devourer forces: "Surrender now, and we'll make your deaths quick." The aliens in the Coalition fleet were stunned by the offer. Nash wasn't promising to spare enemy lives. He was promising to kill them efficiently instead of slowly. Some Devourer commanders tried to surrender. They were allowed to land on designated asteroids where human marines executed them with single shots to the head. Quick, efficient, and final. Others tried to escape. Human pursuit ships hunted them down across the star system, ensuring that no Devourer vessel left the system alive. The battle ended not with negotiation or territorial conquest, but with complete extinction. The Devourer species, which had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, ceased to exist. As the Coalition fleet regrouped after the battle, the alien commanders tried to process what they had witnessed. The humans had achieved total victory, but at a cost that seemed incomprehensible. 60% casualties, Hive Speaker Clicker reported, her compound eyes reflecting the casualty statistics. No other species would accept such losses. Humans don't think about acceptable losses, Captain Grant explained. They think about necessary results. War Prime Gorthal S crystals showed deep purple patterns of distress. But your people are dead, thousands of them. And millions of innocent beings across the galaxy will live because of their sacrifice, Grant replied. That's how humans measure success. Commander Zexter looked at the tactical displays showing the aftermath of the battle. The Devourer home system was completely lifeless. 3 planets that had once teemed with hostile life were now radioactive wastelands. "I understand now," he said slowly. "You didn't join our coalition to learn from us." "No," Grant agreed. "We joined to protect you." Elder Mind Cephal's ancient consciousness processed this revelation. "Protect us from what?" Grant's answer chilled every alien in the fleet to their core.